the sorrow wind blows, omens of disaster. Black fog overcast on the horizon. Premonitions make my bones shiver. Slivers of light drown in this dark atmosphere, where every day is darker than the last, and nobody's ever present in the silver glass. I ask for better days, but my wish is hollow. No answer ever follows. Bitter regret and sorrow is too much to swallow. Tomorrow never comes here in this dark atmosphere with only sadness and fear. It's clear that I can't see my path. Clash with the devil on my shoulder, fearing the aftermath. Days get colder, but nobody ever gets older. My spirit collapsed from a burden too heavy to shoulder. The more I live here, the more I die. Slowly at first, but faster now. Desperate, my soul clings to the light as I wallow in the fright of eternal night. Despite my fight, I cannot resist the cold that bites my bones whenever the sorrow wind blows. What's up, everybody? How you doing? So, my name is Asante Haughton, and I'm a person who has lived with depression and anxiety for the large majority of my life. Also, for the large majority of my life, I've been obsessed with stories and words, and the words used to construct these stories. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to use my words to construct my story and let you know about, I guess, what I have gone through in my life, and to tell you about how I was able to get to the place I'm at today, and also maybe to think about how we can help other young people who may be struggling get the help that they need. So this is it, my story, chapter 1, Genesis. So when I was a kid, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would tell you I wanted to be an adventurer. I guess in my mind, I felt like Indiana Jones, and I was always trying to escape from something. You see, growing up for me, it wasn't easy. At 5 years old, I found myself living in a shelter with my mom and my 2 older brothers, and from the shelter, we ended up in public housing, and we never had the opportunity to celebrate things like birthdays and Christmases, and I remember peeling the mold off of my toast and eating my Frosted Flakes with roaches swimming in the milk. It was the only food that we had. My mom, she was working, and I didn't get to see her much, and my father wasn't around, and my brothers are much older, so they weren't around, so I spent a lot of time alone. But despite that, at school, well, I was a star on the field, and I was a star in the classroom. As for birthday parties, I couldn't afford my own, but I got invited to everybody else's. So in elementary school, I was kind of killing it. Well, then one day, my mom, she came home doing something I'd never seen her do before. She was crying. She said that my father had been stalking her and threatened to kill her. So that meant that we had to move across the city to an even more notorious housing project. And that meant all of a sudden I just lost my friends. I lost my community. I lost my home. Suddenly, everything was different. But then grade 9 started, and I was able to make some friends, and, that was good. And then the summer after grade 9, I met my first girlfriend, and that was good too. But then, a really tough day that would change my life happened. I remember it very clearly. It was a Sunday morning, and my brothers and I, we were watching the Euro Cup soccer final between France and Italy, and then we got a knock on the door. So then I went to the door, and I answered it, and there were 2 men in these uniforms saying they're from the suicide crisis hotline, and they were looking for a lady named Jasmine. And I thought this was really weird, because Jasmine is my mom's name. But not thinking anything of it, led them in the house, went upstairs, opened my mom's bedroom door, and what do we find but our mom on the floor? She's crying, pills scattered around her, saying she doesn't want to go on anymore. And it felt like a wrecking ball hit me, and the wall upon which all of my beliefs about the world, that wall was shattered. And I kept thinking, wake up, wake up. But there was nothing to wake up from. This was real. This was really happening. my mother wanted to end her life. It was on that day that everything changed. Chapter 2, Into the Darkness. So they took my mom to the hospital. They gave her a prescription for antidepressants. They sent her home. We thought everything would be okay, but we were wrong. Over the next year, my mom would spend a lot of time in and out of the hospital, slowly deteriorating. And then the conspiracy theory started. She imagined that the government was after us and they had cars outside the house watching us, so she put sheets up over all the windows so no one can see inside. She started to hallucinate and hear voices, and she stopped eating and sleeping almost completely. And by the time, summer after grade 10, my brothers and I, we saw that she was deteriorating really fast. So we had to do something to keep our mother alive. So we went to KFC and got a big bucket of chicken. And we sat around the table coming up with a plan. And then we went home. And the next day, we executed that plan, and we called 911, and we lied to them and said our mom is a danger to herself. They came immediately, saw how bad she was, boom, right into the back of the ambulance, straight to the hospital. When she arrived, my mom, she weighed 85 pounds, standing at 5'10", so she wasn't doing very well at all. But this time, after several appearances at the hospital, they finally decided to keep her. She got a diagnosis, and her treatment started. She finally started to do a little bit better. Chapter 3, No Candles in the Twilight. So now my mom was in the hospital, and she was slowly improving, so I was able to shift the spotlight from her now onto myself. I realized something wasn't right. Anxiety kept me from leaving the house. Anxiety kept me from engaging with anybody else or having a social life, and I spent all of my time in my basement playing video games and reading books, losing myself in these fantasy worlds and these stories, because in my world and my story, nothing was okay. So then, from there, what happened? Well, I wanted to figure out what was happening with me. I had all these really difficult thoughts as well. In my mind, I was a loser, and I was unlovable, and I had to figure it out. So I did what anybody in high school would have done in that moment, and I started to watch Dr. Phil. And so I spent a lot of time watching Dr. Phil. And after about 6 months of my daily practice, I was still feeling anxious and still feeling very depressed. But I did learn about this thing called self-talk. And self-talk is what you say to yourself in your head, the things that only you can hear, but you think everybody else in the world is thinking. And I started to pay attention to my self-talk. And it was like being strapped down in this chair, listening to this really loud recording about this horrible, ugly, unlovable loser of a person, except the voice was my voice. The person was me. No wonder I felt the way that I felt. But I wanted to beat that voice and prove that voice wrong. And at 16 years old, the way I felt I could do that was to get a girlfriend. So that became my mission in life, but not just any girl. I had a crush on this girl from my grade 10 science class, and it was a summertime, so I thought when I go back to school in September, it's gonna go down. But I had one problem. I didn't know how to talk to girls at all, but I did have a plan. So my oldest brother, he's this really charming guy, and he had a lot of people calling the house all the time. We're gonna call them friends. And so he had these girls calling the house all the time, and I noticed this, and he'd answer the phone, and it would be like, hello, and then his voice would drop octave, what's up? At this point, he was talking to a girl. So I ran up the stairs, and I picked up the other end of the receiver real slowly, and he'd be saying all these things to the girls, and the same things to different girls, and it was working, right? So logically, I started to write it down. And so anyway, September rolls around, and lo and behold, this girl ends up in my first period class, and I'm like, yes. And I guess where I'm going with this is that we hit it off, and we started to go out, and she was really cool, and she was funny, and she was smart, and most importantly, she treated me really well. But did this solve any of my problems? No. I still had debilitating anxiety. I was still feeling the effects of the depression. And eventually, as we got closer, I pulled away because I didn't want to explain to her what was happening with me or the fact that I have a mom that hears voices. So then, the love life thing didn't work out. I thought, what if I became good at something? Maybe I'd feel better. So I started to rap. I became good at that. Didn't feel better. Started to play basketball. Became good at that. Didn't really feel better. Then I started school in university first year, and it was a huge culture shock for me. I felt like I was just this poor black kid from the projects in this place where I didn't feel like, not a lot of people looked like me, and I assumed everyone came from, privileged two-parent background, the white picket fence and the dog, all that. And it just made me feel more alone and just exacerbated the feelings of anxiety and depression. But a good thing happened that first year. I started to take psychology, and I learned that I wasn't the problem. I had something called depression and anxiety, and it could be treated, and I started to hope. Chapter 4, Chasing Dreams. So now, second year university, I thought I had it all. I had a job at a nightclub, and, now I was making some money, and I had the clothes, and, I had like a bunch of friends. I was living the life, except I felt worse than ever. And every day I thought about, doing the unthinkable and taking my own life. But then something happened that would change all of that. My best friend's mom runs a daycare out of her apartment, and I really like kids, so I'd go over there all the time just to hang out and help out with the kids. And I remember being there one time, sitting on the couch and watching the kids. They were playing, and I watched, and they just looked so happy, and they looked so alive. And I thought, I want to be able to feel that again one day. So at that point, I committed to doing anything to feel alive again. I started to see a therapist, and she helped me more in 6 months than I was able to help myself in over 6 years. She helped me identify things that I didn't realize I was experiencing as trauma. The domestic violence that happened between my parents, not having my mother or my father around growing up. The fact that I grew up in this neighborhood where there was, crime and poverty and all these difficult things, and, I didn't realize all this was happening inside of me. Watching my mom almost die, this was all traumatic. So at that point, she was able to say, if we work, you can develop the coping skills and you can get better. So I said, that's cool, let's do it. Let's do the work. And then I started to get better and better, and then I started to feel a lot better. From there, I was able to finish my university degree, and now I have a great job, and I have great friends, and my mom's doing really well, and she's working, and my father's even back in my life, and I've been able to do all these really cool, amazing things. I've been on TV a bunch of times, I've been in the newspapers, I've been in a documentary. I've been traveling the world. I've been speaking to thousands of people in Colombia, Ireland, the US. Just this past year, there was an event, and the Prime Minister's wife was supposed to speak, and she wasn't able to make it, so guess who they called? And here I am now doing a TED Talk, like, whoa. So the most important thing, the best thing is I get to go home every day to a lovely wife. So my life right now is pretty damn dope. But my story, it's a common story for a lot of kids around the world. But the ending of my story is not very common. Most young people who have stories similar to mine don't have a happy ending. So what can we do then to do better for these young people? And I thought about, what if we said to them, instead of saying what's wrong with you, what if we said what's wrong? What if we designed our services to be more proactive than reactive? What if, instead of waiting for them to show up on our doorsteps, we went and we showed up on theirs? I think these things could make a huge difference. So I challenge any adult who might be listening to make space for young people to tell their stories, and for young people who might be struggling to tell your stories, because I think stories can save lives. I know that telling mine was able to save my life, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity, because I used to pray to God to bring an end to the rain. I'm wondering if there would ever be an end to the pain. I'm feeling like, God, why don't you remember my name? To the point I didn't believe in heaven, insane. I lost faith, even though I never should. Yup, I had it hard, but I should have understood. It was all a test that would make me stronger, but it hit harder than a dunk by Vince Carter. As I grew larger, I tried to find the solutions to the mental pollution, my personal revolution. Through music and support from my friends and my family, I got to overcome the depression and tragedy. Far from living lavishly, but rich in my spirit. Now whenever I pray, I know that God hears it. Nothing comes near it. This happiness I feel now. Everything I dreamed for feels like it's real now.